Why, hi there, it's me, it's Uncle Ron, and I have some random thoughts that a couple of you have asked. Yes, I need a haircut. Yes, second puberty has given me a lot of nose hair. I'm sorry. First one comes from David, who enjoys the videos I put on YouTube. He says, "You put more strategy into your football coaching than I do. I try to emulate the thinking process, but I revert to just play the game mode and stop analyzing the situation." Okay, so what is my football playing philosophy? There's a couple things I do. It's not a ton of prep work. If I'm not sure how a team operated in real life, I will look it up on not Pro Strategy Football, Pro Football Reference, see what they do, primarily pass, primarily run, and then kind of go from there. But I kind of treat football play calling like I do in a baseball game. You get 27 outs, and in football, you get 3 downs to get 10 yards. And if I can get those 10 yards, I can keep my offense on the field, and eventually I'm going to put myself in a position to score. Um, Depending on the football game, there just aren't a lot of plays to call. If you do solitaire pro football, you get run, short pass, or long pass. In Stratomatic, there are a bunch of runs and pass plays, and it gives you, you can take what the game gives you as a call in your ear or change it. I recently just gussied up Pro Strategy Football 2026, and Carrie Batts and the crew have done a tremendous job with that. And again, it gives you kind of a play call if you so choose, and kind of go from there. But I kind of subscribe to the 1990 New York Giants Super Bowl philosophy of, if the other team don't have the ball, they cannot score, which is how the Giants won that Super Bowl, if I remember correctly, having the ball for 40 minutes. I think Buffalo had like a point a minute. So, again, you just kind of take your time a little bit, but not too much after the play. See what you think is going to work. If a game makes a suggestion for you on what you should call, you could either run it and go, okay, that's kind of what I was thinking, or override it. But you don't have to give it too much horrible thought. Again, though, because I primarily focus on playing offenses when I play a game. With Solitaire Pro, all you can do is play offense. In Strat, I let the computer make the decision on the defense, and in Action PC, I make the call. Again, take what the information the game gives you. And Action PC, I knows that. Just hold on. In Action PC, the game gives you percentages and how successful, or yardage and how successful a play would be. Use your best judgment with that. Or in Pro Strategy Football, again, what does the logic dictate? But again, first downs are important. It doesn't mean ground and pound, and try to fool what the defense is going to think the defense is going to call. Football is a game of subterfuge. And the more can be a little bit out there. I mean, if you watch Dave Gardner's videos, you know he does a lot with reverses and stuff. Try to throw off the defense. Don't let the defense lull you in. But again, you're also kind of hemmed in by what the teams did in real life and how successful they were. If you're trying to get, let's say the '78 Kansas City Chiefs, we did that years and years and years ago, and they were a 10-win team. I think they were 6 wins in real life. It can happen. But you know that primarily, I think they ran a single wing at one point in the season. You know they're not going to throw. 84 Rams would be a better example. It's Dickerson, 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 or any of those running teams. Early 80s Bucks with James Wilder, who I think one night ran it 41 times. It's a lot of Advil when you run it 41 times. So knowing what their tendencies are before you go in. Then again, after the first couple drives, game situation kind of dictates. If you can keep it within a 10-point game, you can run whatever it is you'd like to do. So a running team would continue to run because it's still a 2-score game. You don't have to pass it every time and get out of that rhythm. I think that's what we're going to go with there. But for me, it doesn't take a lot of time, down in distance, and not necessarily the clock. And if it's a team I also want to take as much time off the clock. I like slow, plodding drives. I also will throw it deep every once in a while, too. Depends on, again, strengths of the teams, weaknesses of the defense. You try to exploit and go from there. maybe 60 seconds of pre-work beforehand if I'm not familiar with the teams that I'm playing, because the eras I play, or if I do a modern game, were a long time ago, or teams that I'm not super familiar with. Okay? All right. John asks, would I ever want to do a project again, an old project that I may never have finished, or go back to it a second time? I'm actually kind of doing that right now, John, with the 75-76 Islanders in Strat Hockey. I did that season in Action PC Hockey. Enjoyed the crap out of it. That is a very young team, and I think if you do any team on a single team replay, by about the 10th game with that team, you get to know their strengths and weaknesses. And with the 75-76 Islanders, you know they are a young team, that there's a lot of potential talent there, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. And so they will madden you. I'm not talking about John Madden, on what they are and what they aren't able to do. I know in Stratomatic they are completely dependent on the power play for scoring chances. I mean, I think right now I've played about 20 games, and Clark Gillies has a shooting percentage of about 3%. I'm not making it up. I think he has 2 goals on a year, despite the fact that we keep feeding him shots. So, yes, it is. I did it once in one engine, and seem to be enjoying it in another engine, because I think that I think the point you were trying to make is, would I revisit something? You get to know the players. I think in any project that you do, where you do 60, 70, 80 games, look at the seasons that I've done, the players become lifelike. It's not just lines of data or ink on a card. You know what they can do, you know where you're weak, you know where they're strong, and because it is a random number generator, either on the computer or with dice or fast action cards, they can surprise you and all that. So I think that was your question. Let me double check that. So to do that again with that team, I don't know how far they get. When I did it in Action PC, they lost to Montreal in the finals in 5 games, but they did win game 1 at the Forum. But yeah, I think it's kind of like a second read or a third read of a good book. You know all the characters. You know, like I said, again, what they're capable of doing or what they're not capable of doing. And it's spending time with a good friend. And so that's how I treat that. Let me see if there was anything else that you wanted to mention. I think he was talking about like a more comprehensive project. With that, what I've been feeling lately is the urge to get back to his roots. My very first project ever was a mixed baseball teams from 75-79, aside from a couple teams that came with his original purchase. The balance were part of promotion. So, where am I? On this button right here. So, along with that project, I think that going back to what you enjoyed at first, and then looking at it as a more mature adult or someone with more time. Obviously, if you're looking from something from the late 70s, which would have been your childhood and my childhood, there's certainly an emotional attachment there to those players and to that era. And again, I think we all like comfort food. And so spending time with that and seeing how they do, because I think our play style changes as we get older. We see different things with how our games are played. We can understand now that there's no such thing as a perfect game with a perfect game engine, and just kind of go from that. And maybe you remember, I know that because currently right now I'm doing the 7 champions from the 7 World Series that we've done on the RSN replays over the years, and it's interesting what pops up. The limited amount of games that I've done so far, memories that I'd completely forgotten. Tommy John or Vic Rashy striking out 7, and how 49 being the year of the walks, and that when we did that, and there were a ton of them. How are the Yankees going to do against the Expos in that series? And I'd forgotten most of the Expo stuff. Goodness, that was 7 years ago that we did that. It was the first one that I did. It was the first project that I shared from start to finish, and I'm not going to cry if the Expos win the World Series like I did 7 years ago. But, you forget there, and so how did the Yankees survive with all the walks that their pitchers gave up? Well, they induced ground balls and got out of innings. In fact, if you watched Game 1 of that series, the only runs the Expos got was a 2-run homer from Gary Carter in the first inning. Every time Rashi put runners on after that, he got out of it. But by that, and you kind of remember how those things work. Steve Rogers, when we did that replay 7 years ago, was dominant. He's the reason why the Expos won that World Series. He shut down the Dodgers, and I believe he got 2 starts in that World Series against Baltimore. And so Rogers was a dominant pitcher. Before we talked about the House of Tudor, there was the House of Rogers. Now go pay your cable and phone bill if you're in Canada. So things will pop up that you forget. And I think it makes it more enjoyable the second time around, especially if there's a long time difference between there. I know that from my writing experiences on a fictional level, that if you finish a story, they don't. The conventional wisdom is don't edit it right away. Let it sit for a while, and then go back and do it and get comfortable. Get comfortable with your own story again. To tear it all apart and go, I don't like that. So I think, John, to answer your question about going back to old projects or things that you had done before, is enough time has passed, and you want to get comfortable with those things again, especially from an era where it was comfort food, where you knew everybody, where life was supposedly simpler, and all the other things. The other thing I wanted to talk about, there's a couple of things that I had too. Ron from Burlington says, cross-era replays, what do I think? I know that it's kind of come up, and for me, this is kind of a new project, although we did a few years ago the 2007 Patriots project where we played them against, I think, 6 other teams. 85 Bears and 99 Rams, other teams that would have been in their peer group as some of the best of all time, and they went 4-3. And so with this current project of taking those 7 champions and the 88 Red Sox, because they were the only team to force the 7th and deciding game in a World Series, some of those teams are obviously the same era, 78, 82, 85, 88. So 5 of those teams would kind of the same, they're not the same year, it's not the same stock, but the same general area. And then there's 3 teams that are completely different, the 49, the 56, and the 2001, completely different baseball and all that. I think if you were to look at, for both of those, and I think the Patriots did play a team from the 60s, I think I tried to match them up against the 62 Packers or something like that, where a real-life matchup would be ludicrous. First of all, because the 62 Packers would have been quite old by the time that they played the 07 Patriots. But, I mean, sports changing over periods of time. I mean, if you look at 70s football is different from 80s football, which is different from 90s football, which is very different from today's football. That it's all theater of the imagination anyway. I don't think anyone would say, if you took a look at, let's say, the 1950 Cleveland Browns with Otto Graham, who I think is in the conversation for greatest quarterback of all time, going up against Tom Brady, who certainly is in the conversation of greatest quarterback of all time, that if you, with the two contrasting styles, you'd look at the numbers and go, Ron, what the heck are you talking about? There's no way that Otto Graham could even compete with that. Well, if Otto Graham was advanced to today, or Tom Brady was put back to 1950, they'd be, I wouldn't say interchangeable, but I think they would both excel. And I think sometimes, instead of trying to worry about how super accurate or what would happen with this or what wouldn't happen with that, I think it's also important just to enjoy the fact of what if with that. Now, having said that, I'm not a huge enjoyer of greatest hits franchise discs. Because I think it kind of stretches the ability of whatever the game engine is. And trust me, For most commercial products, the engines are quite solid. How you get to the end results are quite different. But as far as how the engines themselves, I have no qualms with anything that you've ever seen me play on the channel, um, for the most part. But as far as the games that you see me play over and over and over again, no qualms about the engine. And so I think it's also, again, theater of the imagination for that. Not if someone says, or for the greatest hits teams, uh, if you put great pitching consistently against great hitting, you're either going to get great hitting shut down or great pitching lit up. And I think it kind of loses its luster with that. Um, would you take the? I'm trying to find a good example here. The greatest players in Seattle Kraken history and put them up against the Toronto Maple Leafs? Yeah, good luck with that. But what would happen if Seattle won? What would you think of that? Now you can do that if you so chose, and more power to you if you do enjoy that. To me, it kind of loses its luster about a half hour in. But as far as teams from different eras, again, there are people who do. I primarily, and I think most of the people who produce a lot of stuff on YouTube, do stock replays. That year versus that year, going back. I think it's the best matchup. I think all the math is made for that. You never know what results you're going to get, and I think that's part of the fun for that. But if you took teams from different eras and mixed them together, I think it's to enjoy. I mean, do you seriously think that Babe Ruth wouldn't have enjoyed hitting at some of the modern ballparks? Yeah, how about Babe Ruth at Camden Yards, where he was a bartender when he was 14 years old, way back in the outfield when that was a real yard. Or, I mean, what was the game that I did? It was the 1912 or 13 Washington Nationals, because someone asked for a Walter Johnson game, up against the 65 Los Angeles Dodgers. Can you imagine? I mean, and theoretically, those teams were quite compatible with each other. The Dodgers couldn't hit, and that was dead ball, so no one was going to hit a lot of home runs. So they both had a very let's produce some runs. We got to produce our runs instead of waiting for the 3-run homer. And I think Washington won. But could you imagine? I mean, the players from 110, 115 years ago coming into today's stadiums and seeing all the lights and all the boards and all the technology that kind of comes with modern sports, or even in the 60s, modern color television. Just think of that. And so you don't want to say it's fair to an older team or unfair to a newer team, in that every era is different. And that doesn't necessarily mean that one era is better than the other. There's certainly eras that you're going to enjoy more than others, and that I enjoy more than others, but I'm not going to say that it's better than another. The other thing is, when you get into great team tournaments or whatever, teams that are great within their own subset, one year, 75 Reds, 72 Dolphins. Good example, because I've seen them struggle when they play teams from other years. They were fantastic within the realm of their own community, but put them up, the 75 Reds are a good example of that. Put them up against a team with solid pitching, or even one good pitcher, and they're going to lose a short series or a one-game series. We did that a few years ago when Dave Little wanted them to play the 73, and Tom Seaver shut them down. We did the 75 Reds versus the 99 Red Sox and Pedro Martinez, and the Red Sox bullpen kept the 75 Reds scoreless for 8 innings or whatever it was. That doesn't mean that the 75 Reds are bad or miscarded or all that. It just means that on any given day, anything can really happen. Here's a good example. When I did offline quick sim and the computer failed, or the program failed, it actually PC. 162 games between the 75 Reds and the 62 Mets. Because at the time I did it, the 62 Mets were considered the worst modern team in baseball history, thanks to the 24 Chicago White Sox to break that. And although the computer kind of spit the bid after 120 games. If you looked at the winning percentages for the teams, the Mets were going to win about 40 times. They were going to do what they should have done in real life. That doesn't. So, of course, that means the Reds were going to win close to 120. It's about what you expected, but anything can happen on any given day. All right, Lord, I think that's about enough for that. And so that's some of the questions that you've asked me over the last few weeks, and so those are Uncle Ron's random thoughts. As soon as I can do this.